Hello, I'm Dan Earlywine and welcome to Maintenance and Setup for Electric Guitars and Basses Volume 1. In many ways this videotape and Volume 2 which follows it are much like my new book, How to Make Your Electric Guitar Play Great, but Come to Life. And like my new book, I start with guitar evaluation. You can't set up, maintain, repair, nor should you even buy a guitar that you haven't evaluated very carefully. And the perfect guitar for demonstrating this came in the door this morning. It's a 1973 Gibson Les Paul Custom. This guitar was purchased from a large local music dealer. Their in-shop service people set it up before the sale, and the owner bought it on a 15-day return policy, and now he's out getting second opinions as to whether or not he's getting a good deal here. He took it to his local music store and they said they thought that the pickups had been replaced as well as the bridge and the tailpiece. I think it looks original, and I asked him, did you remove the cover plate and look at the electronics? And he said no. That made me ask, did you remove the truss rod cover and check that the truss rod's working and working well? That's the most important thing when buying a guitar. This will be fun. I love doing this. You always discover things. With the guitar on its side in the playing position, I'm looking down the neck, and what I see is a great up bow where the neck is going in the direction of the string pull. That's also called relief. You can check it by pressing a string at either end of the neck and reaching out and pushing down on that and seeing how much gap you have. I check it with a notch straight edge that sits down over the frets and compares the straight edge to the fretboard, and I see an awful lot of relief, maybe 30 thousandths. The truss rod has to be able to remove this for this guitar to be playable. This owner was also told that the frets have been filed to nothing and it should be refretted, and that may be true. However, this guitar was originally built with low frets. It's called a fretless wonder. They were about 25 thousandths tall when new. I know this because I bought one of these guitars just like this in 1968, the year that it was reissued. When Railway Express brought it to the door, I unpacked it, took the strings off and refretted it that day before even playing it, because I can't play on frets that are this low. I can't get a bend. It'll slip out from under my finger. I'm anxious to look at the truss rod and see if this neck will adjust. With the truss rod cover off, here's what I found. 3 big fat washers that are stacked on the end of the rod. Apparently this acorn nut, as it's called, that's the adjusting nut, was cranked as tight as it could go and couldn't take out the warp. So the music store that sold it to him must have used this little trick to try to get the neck straight, and it failed. Before adjusting a truss rod, I always mark it so I know where it is when it came in, and I always loosen it first. I don't want to tighten it because if it's already too tight I could break the rod, so I'm going counterclockwise, and it's an awful lot of tension on this for such a warped neck. At this point I asked the customer to please leave it overnight so I could do a real serious checkup on it and try a few tricks on it that I know how to do. But I offered to at least check out the volume controls for him, because that could tell me if his pickups were original or not, and it might help me date the instrument. He wants to know what year it was made. I hold my fingers around a screw and a screwdriver tip so it can't slip out onto the plastic or the finish and scratch it. And I can tell with one look this is the original wiring. Nothing's ever been touched. I'd love to own these capacitors. Those are the Sprague Bumblebees. These pots are covered with a white oxidation, a powder, which should be cleaned off and vacuumed out, and they should be cleaned. If he buys it, I'll do it for him. I see the number 1377303. That's a 7-digit serial number. Potentiometer codes would tell you that the year of manufacture on a 7-digit serial number is the 4th and 5th number. That makes this a 1973 pot. So the guitar was probably built in 1973. George Gruen's Guide to Vintage Guitars is a great reference book for knowing all about guitars and for identification. In the appendix on page 335, he tells you all about the pot code for potentiometers and dating a guitar that way. Under the Gibson Les Paul section, he's got Les Paul Customs. It was reintroduced in 1968, and the neck volute on the back of the peghead came in 1970. A volute is this curved raised area added to the back of a Gibson peghead in 1970 to give it strength. On the other side of the volute, on the face of the peghead, is a hollow area where the truss rod nut rests, and that makes it weak in that area. While I'm looking at the back of the peghead, I can't help but notice the serial number of 898569. Once again, I go to George Gruen's book. It's got Gibson serial numbers in there, and on page 83 it tells me that that number was used in 1968, which made this man think it was a 68 Les Paul, but it was used again in 1973. So that really dates it. It has the volute, which came in 1970. It's got a 73 serial number on the peghead and on the potentiometers. Now let's get on to that truss rod. A close look in the truss rod cavity shows you that the mahogany has been compressed by the half-moon washer that the nut tightens against, and it's actually compressed in about 1/16 of an inch. That's one reason they had to stack washers in there, to space the nut out so it would have something to adjust against. While I was in there, I started up about here and cleaned all the rust off these threads. There's a little left here. I'm getting it nice and clean, and I vacuum it out. But there's another reason that this stack of washers was used, and I'm going to show you that too. Not only did the mahogany compress up here at this end of the neck, it's compressed down inside the neck too. They tightened it so much that it pulled the rod forward and squashed the mahogany at the other end of the rod. I can prove this by hammering on the nut. I'm not going to hit the rod, and watch it move. It moved 1/16 of an inch there too. That won't hurt anything though. The rod's still in there and it still works. Here's my fix for that. From hard rosewood I made a 3/32 inch thick half-moon washer, which I'm going to glue into the compression here with super glue. That'll give me a new surface for the metal half-moon washer to bear against. 3/32 of an inch is just about the right thickness, I think. I've got a piece of plastic tubing to protect the threads from the glue, and I'm just using enough glue to do the job. I just want to tack it in place. I'll have to move pretty quick too. Now I'm going to use the half-moon washer of metal to lock it in place and put the nut back on. There's my clamp. Come in there with a little touch of accelerator. Put some Vaseline on the threads of the truss rod and on the face of that washer. And I'm going to come in there with a brand new brass acorn nut and just tighten it till it's snug, and then loosen it. I want it loose for the next step. The next step is to put 2 notched wooden blocks at each end of the neck, and I move them around. There's a padded caul in the center with my clamp and a long straight board, and I'm clamping a back bow into this neck. That's why I move the blocks around till I see a gradual smooth curve, the same kind of curve that you'd get on a neck that's working well when you tighten the truss rod and get it straight, and keep on tightening it, and it goes into a back bow, and then you need to loosen it to get the neck straight again. I call this helping the truss rod adjust. It's not being asked to do all the work by itself. Now when I tighten the rod snug, it's going to hold the neck in this position, I hope. We'll find out. It worked perfectly. The neck is straight as an arrow. I'd buy this guitar, and I'm going to call the man and tell him so. If he does, we're going to carry on with other setup work that it needs. For example, the bridge is collapsed. It's actually concave because someone tightened that stop bar tailpiece right down to the body for years, and it's too much pressure. We've got to clean those pots. But I won't do anything until he buys it for sure. So we'll leave this guitar for a while and come back on it if he does buy it. And another guitar just came in the door with a different maintenance problem. Next patient, please. It's a J.A. Riviera Deluxe Epiphone, the Jorma Kaukonen model. Jorma lives nearby and we're good buddies, and he gave me one of these. only mine doesn't have the problem this has. This one, if you touch the tone control on the rhythm pickup, it shorts out or it crackles. I hope it's a simple fix so we don't have to pull all the guts out. This is a beauty. Here's the problem. That pickup's on right now and you can't hear it. Now you can. At either end it'll short out or crackle. Now it's working. Now it's not. First I'm going to pull off that tone knob using a Stumac knob puller. I drilled holes across the top of mine and sawed slots up the side and broke a chunk out so I can look into it and see what's happening. Plus when I get the knob off it'll drop out quicker. It puts a nice even pressure. My first approach here is to take off the dial pointer and the washer that have thickness and just put the hex nut on, because I'm trying to pull as much of the threaded portion of the pot shaft that I can above the top of the guitar so I can get a hold of it. This is an imported guitar with a smaller shaft. Some American guitars would show more thread above the surface. What I have here is a piece of plastic tubing that's a tight fit onto the threads, jammed down onto it. It's got a wood dowel that's superglued inside of it, and I drilled a hole clear through the dowel, which accepts the plastic tube coming from my contact cleaner. It keeps the pressure in and I can blast that pot without taking it out and clean it. That would be my first approach, and it often works. If it does work, I'm going to do it to all the pots, because any guitar, especially imported guitars, can be loaded with dirt, rubbing compound. You don't know what you'll find in there. Let's check it out. Right away, move it back and forth from end to end, letting that cleaner get all around the wiper inside there. When you take a pot out of a guitar and blow in the side of a pot, you can do a better job. You can really flush it out that way. Let's see what happens. Not yet. I'm going to give it another blast. Second bath. It works. Good. Saves me a lot of time. This is air. Same thing with an air duster. And blast any dirt out of that pot. Here's a pot that I can hold in my hand. This is how I wash them out. You can see the brown stuff on the paper. There's dirt in there. That air will blast it out too. This potentiometer cleaning trick comes to you courtesy of Bill Baldick, a great repairman in the Gruen Guitar Workshop in Nashville, Tennessee. I've got a lot of repair friends that work in that shop, and they're great repair techs. I'm going to go ahead and flush the rest of the pots out now. Before I do that, I'm going to vacuum the inside out real well and get rid of any fuzz, rubbing compound, and extraneous dirt that might be in there. This has a center block in it, so to get the dirt, I just tap it all over and shake it down into a corner. One down there and one down here. Get it consolidated. And there's stuff in there. Then I treat it real gently so I don't move it around again, and I'll get my vacuum out. That's my shop vac. It's a Duracraft tank type, pretty big one. It's kind of loud. I've had it 15 years though, and it keeps on chugging. For $500 or $600 I could get one that's not loud, and I keep dreaming of that. It's got a 1.5-inch hose like most of them do. I turn down a plug on the lathe out of mahogany that's 1.5 inches. It goes in there and it downsizes to plastic tubing from 1 inch to 5/8 down to 1/2 inch, even to 1/4. It's flexible. It goes right in those F-holes without scratching. Can reach any area that I want to and sucks up that dirt, and I'm very thorough about it. Hey, this is playing great. The man just called with a black Les Paul, and I'm glad about that because it'll give me a chance to show you how to fix a collapsed tunematic bridge. That's me once again trying to play Leon Rhodes licks. I've been trying since 1970. That's Leon you're looking at there. He made the Epiphone Sheraton famous in the early 60s, playing in Ernest Tubbs' band, the Texas Troubadours. He played with steel guitar players Buddy Emmons and Buddy Charlton. They played twin steel and guitar duets that were unbelievably great. He's one of my heroes and the finest player I've met. Leon would like this guitar, this fretless wonder, because he likes frets that are about 28 thousandths tall. I refretted his Sheraton recently that way. A straight neck and low action and a light touch. I think we can set this guitar up to please Leon by matching the bridge radius to the fretboard radius. I'm checking the fretboard radius. I'm getting about a 9.5 or a 10. I'm using notched radius gauges. They come in pairs, so you have a narrow notch for this end of the board and a wide notch for this end of the board, and they both read about 9 or 10. That's normal for a pearl inlaid fingerboard like this on a custom. I think the machine probably loads up on pearl and takes extra wood off the radius, because the bridge here is built as a 12-inch radius, and it wouldn't make sense to have a 12-inch radius bridge and a 9-inch radius fretboard. I'm going to take off the bridge and see what it reads. I took my string winder and I cut it back in sort of a curve so it's about half the depth. They don't need to be as deep as they come. In this way I can never hit the edges of the peg head and knock off lacquer or wood. I'm going to save these strings for the initial setup. I don't want to put new strings on until I need to unless they break. I use a strip of Velcro to keep them in order. Hang them on the wall. I can't get the stop bar off. It's wedged on there. I think the stud here is taller than the other one. I've got a specialized driver here that's made for this job. It captures the head of the stud. Can't slip off now, which a screwdriver does and chips paint or plating. And this is really stiff. I'm going to go slowly, just give it a couple of turns to get this stud at the same height as the other one, and I can get it off of there now. This bridge is not a 9. It's not a 10. Not a 12. It's really not even a 20. It's close to a 20. It's collapsed and almost flat. It's hollowed out towards the center, and that's why the strings are buzzing in the center area of the neck. With this black straight edge on the gold bridge, you can see how much it's caved in. It's as much as, it's more than a 32nd, less than a 16th. That's quite a gap. I'm using a C-clamp to gently clamp this bridge flat. I'm not going very far at once. It's propped up on 2 blocks of plywood. I don't even have to take the saddles out. I clamp it a little bit and let it sit for a while, and I'll come back and do it again later. We're trying to squeeze this flat without breaking it at the edge of this hole where it's very thin in the cast metal. That's where it breaks if you go too far, or even if you don't go too far. Sometimes they break and sometimes they don't. On a valuable vintage guitar, I would recommend that you take the original bridge and put it in the case for posterity and just buy a replacement bridge for it. Another option you have for flattening the bridge is to remove the retainer clip and all the saddles and keep them in order. I was going to do this anyway for the way I set up a bridge. I'll show you that in a minute once we get it flat. With the saddles removed, now I can move my blocks around and squeeze in different areas. A little bit here. I was starting to get a split in the center from concentrating all my pressure there. And we'll see if this works. I don't care if I get a split or two. The bridge will still work. I just want to get it straight. And I think I will. With a good straight edge resting on top of the bridge now, I can only fit a 4/1000 feeler gauge in the center. That's plenty flat enough for me. There's the crack in the plating right there and right there. But the casting's still good. I'm cleaning all the dirt everywhere I find it on the bridge body here with a Q-tip and some lighter fluid. It's the same as naphtha, and I'm wearing vinyl gloves. That's what I wear for light-duty cleaning to keep my hands free of solvents. I also use these nitrile gloves if it's a more abrasive cleaning job. They're tougher. This is household oil. It's like sewing machine oil or 3-in-1. Mix that with your lighter fluid or naphtha, and I drop the saddles and their screws in there one at a time and give them a little bath. It helps clean them and lube them at once. I keep them in order. These aren't all that dirty. I run the screw back and forth through the threaded hole. If it's really dirty, I'll take it out and clean it separately. Wipe any grease off. And now what I'm going to do is take these base side saddles and really inspect their slots and see how close they are to center. The reason I want to know if the slots are on center is because I turned these saddles on the base side around facing forward, the D, A, and E. Gibson always has them going backwards. That puts the peak into the string, and I like the string to come up over the peak, like you see here. If the slots were too much off center and you had bad string spacing, you might have to replace the saddles. That's not the case here. And if you do what I'm about to do, which is reshape these saddles to the right radius, I'll be getting down into the metal anyway, and I can probably move the strings any place I want to. I don't have any trouble intonating a bridge saddle like this with it facing forward. Maybe Gibson did in the 50s with the heavier strings, and that's why they pointed them backwards. I've never really known. Right now these strings are about a 20-inch radius, and you really need to measure that at the bottom of the strings like I'm doing here. They're not anywhere close to a 10. This is one of the little punch-out radius gauges from the back of my new book, and they work quite nicely. I need to lower the outside strings until they touch the gauge, and they all read at 10 and leave the center alone. I can only do this if there's room to lower them in the bridge saddle without the string running into the adjusting screw. I think there is. I could also gain on my radius by taking the bridge off and trying to flatten it even more, but I'd risk cracking it. I'm going to try doing it right here. I drop the tailpiece right down to the body. It's not going to hurt the bridge because there's only enough tension to keep them taut, so I can follow my progress as I lower them into the saddles. I'm using a small razor saw. I've got other tools and files which I will be using, but this will do the job to get me down there, at least on the little strings. Then I check them. I check the progress often as I'm lowering the strings. I'm going from the outside towards the center. I'm leaving these two alone, the D and the G strings. It's a good idea to tape off the pickup covers too. This is drafting tape, same on the tailpiece, so it won't pull off any plating in case I slip. And I'm using the string to hold the saddle down. I pop it out of the slot and set it to the side, but it's got pressure on that saddle while I work, and I'm holding that blade at both ends very firmly and making only forward strokes. Very positive. Don't jump out of the slot. That's almost there already. It's really the outside strings that need the lowering the most. The E string I just set to the side, and the pressure will hold that saddle firm while I file it. I'm using a Stu-Mac nut file here. You don't have to have a nut file to do this. I'm going to show you another way. This is a little smaller than the actual string size I want. That way I can move from side to side and move the string around if I need to. I think the only string that needs to be moved is the A string. It's slightly out of spacing. The A string needs to come towards the E string. I'm using a smaller file than the string size, which is about a 36. This is a set of 10 through 46. I'm filing it sideways. It doesn't have much of a slot, so I can create a slot that's the right size and shape, but I'm moving it over first. You can also do this with a razor saw. It just takes a little bit longer. You can do a lot with one saw. I'm trying to get the spacing even. I think the D string's got to come over too. I'm using a 20 thousandths nut file on the D string and moving it sideways. Once again, there's not much of a slot here, so I can make it the shape I want. As I deepen the D string and the G string and the A string and the B string to give them an actual real slot, I'm going to have to lower the outside E-strings even more. When I get them all to depth, then I'll shape them. Now the G string's got to go towards the B. The razor saw is perfect for that. I'm changing the shape of these slots. I made a little slip there, but it won't matter because you'll see what I'm going to do in a minute. I'm getting the spacing perfect while I check the depth. When I get where I want to be, I'm going to reshape the tops of all of these saddles and create a really nice smooth groove for the strings. Once the string's located where I want it, that's when I drop it, and I'm holding my tool perfectly level, not forward or backwards. This will be the final depth of the slot minus any polishing which I'll give it, and I'll create a ramp later. And then I check the depth by pressing on the string right in front of the radius gauge. If it doesn't touch or move it, I'm not there yet. This isn't there. I'm using a 20 thousandths nut file on the A string to move it towards the E string. I like the smaller file because it's not fat and it won't make a big fat slot that I don't want. And then I roll file it. I'm leaving the old edge of the old slot alone. I'm staying away from that because it'll disappear. You can use a razor saw or a small file and roll file and get a big slot with it. Now the E string has to go towards the A string. I'm using a 28 thousandths. I'm going to leave this far side edge alone. It still needs to drop, so I can drop it and move it at the same time. Move it over and then round it. Then check it. I have the strings where I want them now. They're right to a 10-inch radius, and I'm going to very carefully vacuum up any brass shavings and gold plating. This is my 1/4-inch tube. I can get underneath the parts and be very careful with it. My wonderful wife Joan, who helps me shoot these videos and edit them, saw the section on the vacuum cleaner and felt sorry for me, and she went out and bought me this great Porter cable. This is the one I wanted. It's real quiet. Thanks, Joan. My saddle radius is at 10 now, and I'm going to remove the strings. I'll leave them on at the peg head end and lift them off with the stop bar, being very careful that I don't pop the saddles out of the bridge because there's no retainer clip. When I put strings on for a setup, it's a very simple tie. I just run the string through the post hole, kink it towards center, and make a couple of winds. I don't tie them on as if I was going to play a gig tonight and didn't want to go out of tune, because I want to be able to remove them easily. If you tie them on, they'll get kinks and break, and that happens often during a setup. So why make it happen any more than you have to? I expect to go through 2 sets of strings during a setup. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put the stop bar back on to hold the strings in place and set the guitar aside while I work on the bridge. I keep the saddles in order and work on them one at a time. The first thing I do is remove any dust or metal filings really from the screws before they go back and forth and bring it into the saddle. And I clean out any filings that got down into the bridge body. When the saddles are removed, I put a number on the bottom of each one in ink so I don't get them mixed up. When I'm done working on these, they start to look quite a bit the same. Next, I remove the screw from the saddle so that I can work on the saddle. I bought this collection of brass tubing at the hobby store. These are cut-offs from industry, and they sell them very cheap. There's many sizes, and I use it for a lot of things in guitar repair. Here's 3 of them together in a nest. They slide right inside of each other and slide right over my screwdriver, which allows me to capture the head of the screw, not mar it or slip as I'm working on it. I got the idea for this tool from Jim Rolfe, who makes great pickups in Highland, Kentucky, J.M. Rolfe Pickups. He made a tool similar to this for adjusting pickup pole pieces so you can grab onto it, capture it, and not slip. I saved these 3 tubes just for that job. I found this little vise at the Guild of American Luthiers convention this past summer. It's perfect for holding a saddle while I work on it. For those of you that weren't lucky enough to be there, here's an idea for you. Take a clothespin and reverse it in the clamp so it becomes a pincher like that. And I drilled a hole through it and I shaped it as you see here. I put my adjusting screw through the hole from the heavy side, thread it tight and it holds the piece firmly, and the bevel allows me to work on the back side of the saddle while I shape it. If you don't have a repair vise or some sort of bench vise, set up a rig like this with clamps that you can get at the hardware store. This is quite firm. I've got both hands free now to file. I'm taking the top of the saddle down a bit because I deepened the slot. This is the B string. I didn't deepen it too much. And if I create any sharp edge on the front, I'm going to come up against that and roll it off. I'll roll off the corners too if they're sharp. Actually, these are pretty nice bridge saddles. They're old. They were shaped differently in the old days compared to what you can buy today. I'll show you that in a minute. I'm trying to get a very shallow string slot, just enough to hold it, and create a ramp from the rear. This is a saddle off the same guitar, 73. See how the shoulders are sort of rounded off and there's a distinct facet on the back? Everything's sort of a gentle curve and it's more comfortable. That's as opposed to this newer Gibson 2 pneumatic saddle, which has got a smaller flat on the top, which I don't mind. It's probably more accurate, but it's very sharp on the edges. I'd remove that. And most aftermarket saddles are like this too. I've got some 400 grit gold free cut paper wrapped around my file as a backer. Follow that with some 600. You can go as high as you want. I keep it wrapped on the file so that it just isn't hanging free and it might scar up my gold plating, which I wouldn't really care because this is just an extra screw, but if you only have one set you might care. Now I'm going to clean up that slot and this will be done. This is the B-string saddle. That's the depth that I filed to. I want to keep that. That's the slot that I set. But not the rear of the slot, not that deep triangular wedge. That's the old slot that was filed at the factory. I want to blend that away from my lines. That factory groove is a little deeper than I want, so I'm going to increase the back angle on the saddle towards the front edge, and that'll get rid of that deep V-shaped groove until I get down to the notch that I created. Now that's going to make the front edge a little sharp again, so I'm going to come in there and roll that off like I was dressing a fret. Same for the corners. This is 1000 grit. This is the G string. The slots will get bigger as I go down the line. Now I'm going to show you a production method that I use for doing the same job. It's what I call deluxing the saddles, when I take them and make them look like little jewels. This is a miniature grinder. I think it's a jeweler's grinder. It's a baby. It's got a little handpiece off one end that I bolted to the table. It has a little wire brush on it, and it used to have a grindstone on this end, which I replaced with a small disc sander that I made out of aluminum and turned it on the lathe. It's got foam on it and sandpaper. I use this for shaping frets when I do certain types of fret jobs where I shape them and polish the ends before I glue them in. You can see that on the advanced fretting tape. I also use it to shape bridge saddles. There's my little disc sander. This little table is adjustable and holds a fret so I can swing it in and trim the end at any profile to match a fingerboard. We're not going to use that here. I take my saddles and help shape them on that after a quick filing. Remove any burrs down here on this rubber abrasive wheel, and then I polish it on the brass. This whole thing runs through a foot switch that's variable speed. I can go very slow or very fast. For the saddles that I've already taken up to 1000 grit, I'm only going to use the brass bristle brush to polish them. Otherwise I'd eliminate my groove, and I don't want to do that. There's the polish that you can get from the brass wire brush. This is the D string saddle. Untouched. There's the flat factory edge on the top. Rough file. Knock it down to expose my groove, and it's not too deep. Take a little off the backside. It can be very fast with my little machine. That's enough file work right there. This is the D saddle, so I'm going to leave a deeper groove here
This is my smoothing file. Just quickly knock the corners off because my machine will do the rest. I'm really showing this for you repair folks out there. This is not really a player's type of situation. It's pretty advanced, but it's a cool tool. Now, since this is the professional job, I'm going to go ahead and hit into my screw. I don't care because it's a replacement. I can make that wheel go really slow. It'll keep on grinding. I'm knocking my screw down a tip there, so it's not in my way. I use this like a file to shape it, just rolling it, going at a very slow speed. This is a 220 grit gold paper, and I don't care if I hit my screw because it's just a dummy screw, and this is the professional level. Next, I use the wheel. This is the little rubber abrasive fret polishing wheel that Stu Mack sells. I go very slow. It's got a groove in it. I put the groove in there with the file. This thing will really shape in a hurry. I can knock all those corners off. If I go fast, it'll be too much. It'll erase my slot. This is replacing hand work is what it's doing. And go right to the buffer, and that's where I'll increase the speed. I'll go a little faster on the brush. There's saddles that haven't been done yet. There's a deluxe set, the G&D, and there's two that are just hand sanded. The deluxe ones look like gold because it's brass. It's polished brass. It's playing good now with a 10-inch radius and well-fit saddles. With a little practice, I could play Leon Rhodes licks, and I plan to practice on them. I even like these low frets, which surprises me. Now I wish I wouldn't have taken those frets out of my Black Beauty back in 1968, but it's too late now. Before I go on with the setup here, which will include cleaning the pots, setting the intonation, setting the pickup height, and the final action, let's present a different scenario. Imagine that you broke the bridge when you tried to straighten it, or else you didn't want to even try to straighten it. You wanted to take that vintage part and set it aside, even though it was unplayable and unusable for this guitar, but you wanted to keep that for future resale, and you wanted to go to a replacement part. I use several parts manufacturers. Of course, my first and foremost is Stuart McDonald because I've been working there for 15 years. I use WD Music Products and All Parts. These are my three main suppliers. Each of us has some of the same parts and some very different parts. And you have to learn to shop between the different suppliers to find the exact part that you need. Of course, for a Gibson guitar, my biggest supplier would be Gibson. But I'm a warranty center and I can buy these parts and I keep them in stock. If you can't find a warranty supply center in your area or have trouble buying from Gibson, that's when you go to the suppliers. And of course, a lot of the guitars that you'll be working on won't be Gibsons. They'll be Gibson copies and imported guitars, and those parts fit differently. Generally, they're loose on a Gibson guitar. For now, let's get rid of these nice saddles and the bridge, set it aside, and try something different. I'm going to take this tape off also because I don't like to leave masking tape on a plated surface any longer than I need to, and I always use Draftsman's tape because it has a low tack. This is an offshore replacement bridge for a ABR-1 Tune-O-Matic. It's a little bit loose on the studs though. It would fit on an Epiphone import. One fix I might use for a situation like this is my special little brass hobby tubing. Cut lengths of that and slide it over the studs. It just happens to fit perfectly and takes up the slop, and now I'm back in business. Another solution would be to use an imported stud, which is larger and fits the imported bridge, but of course you'd have to take this original part out and re-tap the hole with a metric tap to fit, and you'd be undoing a vintage part. But it is a solution. Here's another bridge you could put on this guitar. This is the Schaller Nashville bridge made by Tone Pros. They've installed set screws on the back side that bear against the studs. It's almost a tight fit anyway, much tighter than the other imported bridge. And I wouldn't be against tightening this screw against that threaded stud. It might squash the thread a little bit, You could always replace the stud, and I don't think it would hurt it that bad. The nice thing about this is that it locks it tight, so your intonation stays put, and you probably gain sustain. Another good thing about the shallower bridge is that it has more travel. This Nashville bridge, if you had troubles getting good intonation with the standard ABR1 bridge, you might want to switch to this bridge. Here's a 1999 production Les Paul. It uses the shallower studs, the smooth shank thumb wheels, but it has an ABR1 bridge with larger holes. So it's the vintage style bridge with the modern thumb wheel. This bridge wouldn't go on the black Les Paul because the holes would be too big. But you could drop the Tone Pros bridge right onto these studs and lock it home. Yet one more way to go. These are all bridge saddle parts and studs. Stu Mac parts, Gibson parts. I've got bags of thumb wheels in chrome, nickel, and gold. There's the old nylon inserts from the early 60s. I've got drawers full of used parts. As a matter of fact, I found 6 gold saddles that fit this black one perfectly, and that's what I'm really working on. I took his off and saved them just in case my Deluxian would upset him. Before we get off the Tune-O-Matic bridge setup, let me show you one more setup on a different bridge here. Now I want to do a temporary setup on a replacements parts bridge. This is the one that fit loose. The first thing I would do is take off the retainer clip and turn these base side saddles facing forward. The clip just pries right out. This one comes out a little bit too easy if you ask me. It's not as tight as a real Gibson part. I like my bridge saddles to have no slot or groove in them, so when you're ordering from a supplier, ask them if they come pre-slotted. If they are, it's okay for some guitars, but it might not line up with the edges of the fingerboard, and it might not line up with your pole pieces. Alright, I've got the strings on the new saddles spaced at the bridge the way I like them, so they line up along the edges of the fretboard and the pole pieces. They're not too close to the fretboard edge and not too far in, and they're well spaced at the bridge. The only string that doesn't line up almost perfectly on center is the A string. It needs to be shifted over a bit for the string spacing to be right. That's why I like to deal with saddles that don't have a slot in them. I've got a good tension on the strings. They're not at pitch and they're spaced just right. I'm going to notch these the way I saw it done at the Gibson factory in Nashville. A good rap from a plastic-faced hammer. That seats the string right down into the saddle. It doesn't help the strings any, but you'll get a really good saddle groove. That's a good groove. It holds the string and it's shaped like the string. My only complaint would be that it's got striated marks from the windings on it, and I didn't hang around the setup department long enough to find out if they do any more to the saddle or not. This is plenty if your saddle radius is correct and matches the fretboard. If you think about it, this looks like what you see in a music store on a production Gibson. A nice little seat for the string, not too much. It's a perfectly acceptable production technique. This retainer clip is too loose for my taste, so what I do is take a screwdriver and press down between each saddle screw and start a little kink all the way across. And then go back and forth, deepening the kink so it's a little V shape. These kinks will keep the retainer clip tight and hold the screws in place. Now I'm back to the real bridge and I'm setting it up. No matter what I've done, I can't get the treble E string screw to sit down in its hole right to the bottom. It rises up like that and I'm afraid the string might hit it. The reason for this is that the hole here on the treble E string is a little bit lower than the one down on the bass E string. It's about 0.010 off. I'm using a tiny round file to enlarge that hole by 0.010 towards the top. If the end of the screw can go up, then the front or head of the screw can go down. I'm willing to bet. While I'm at it, I'm going to file a little bit on the front of the hole where that screw will sit down into. I think the combination will let it do just what I want, which is sit down flush. The bridge stud on the base side is bent. I don't know how it happens. You see it a lot. I think people whack on them. I'm going to put the thumb wheel all the way down to the body to hold it tight and use my little brass tubes that I had on the screwdriver and just give it a bend. It gives it, it'll straighten it out without breaking anything. Yeah, that's more like it. Sometimes you have to remove a stud like this too, in which case you take two thumb wheels and put them on one stud. In this case, I'm lifting off the stop bar with the strings on it, removing the base side stud, and I've got cardboard with a hole drilled in it right down over the stud and rags. And I'm very carefully grabbing each thumb wheel with a separate pair of pliers. These are locked onto one. I don't want to chip the plating, and I tighten them against each other. Then I can back the stud out. The wheels lock onto the stud and you can unthread it. I don't need to take this one out because I already straightened it. Sometimes they have to come out for one reason or another. Maybe it's stripped, what have you. I made this little tool that's got a hole that's threaded and it bottoms out. It's a blind hole. It doesn't go very deep. And then I can thread the thumb wheel right against that tight. This eliminates all the pliers and the scariness of it, and I can install these studs like that. That was just a tip for the repairmen out there. I don't think a player would go to the trouble to make a tool like that. If you use the thumb wheel technique, watch your plating. I got a little gold dust down here, and I'm dusting it off with my bench brush. StuMac sells these, and I asked them to find one because for years I've been so fond of my Gibson bench brush. This came from the Gibson factory in Kalamazoo, and I bought it at the auction there when they moved to Nashville. The men there told me it was once this long and it got worn down that short. Now I'm going to put the parts on this and the strings on the bridge to hold it in place, and we'll clean out the electronics. This is another tool that I got from the Kalamazoo factory. It's called a bridge jack. It's made from steel and it's carpeted. Actually, I made this, but I saw it used there. And they use it to quickly raise the bridge up while they lower or raise the thumb wheel without fighting it. You know how stiff that can be sometimes? This makes the job easy. It doesn't take much pressure from this jack to support that bridge while you raise or lower the thumb wheel. Now it's time to clean off these pots. The oxidation and dust in there is just horrible. I'll use a vacuum cleaner and my reducing hoses and a brush. I don't want to get the dust into the pots. Now I'm going down to a 3/8 hose so I can get in these tighter spots. Now I'm down to the smallest hose. It's 1/8 diameter. I thought the shop-minded people here might like to see what I did with my new vacuum cleaner. I bought 2 hoses and cut one of them short. It plugs into 1.25" plastic plumbing pipe that runs across the ceiling. It's attached to the plumbing that goes to my heater and air conditioner. It's a heat pump. I put a T and a drop right there in the center so it's right over my bench. And I put another fitting at the other end, just with an L, and it drops down there. I can use either port and cap off the other one, and the hose hangs from the ceiling. This way I don't have to haul my vacuum cleaner all over the shop like I used to a few days ago. Down there at the bottom of the bandsaw, see that white thing that looks like a roll of toilet paper? That's really a 4-inch plastic thin wall plumbing pipe that runs under the floor in the cement. When I built this shop, I put it in there to that hole right there where my table saw usually sits. That way I could put a dust collector on that and suck the chips out. Now we're using it for a floor sweep. I don't even need my dust collector with this little vacuum setup. I can plug the hose into this little apparatus that I made for my bandsaw. It's closed on the bottom and it fits very tightly. I plan to put a gasket on it. That really sucks up the sawdust well. I can also take it and plug it in here, and this goes around and behind that bench and over to my belt sander. I spent a couple hours fitting this heavy cardboard tube that I got from Gibson some parts in and some Bondo, so it really fits around this bandsaw tight. I plan to put some weather stripping around that to make it even tighter, but it catches all the sawdust, the best I've ever had. The vacuum attachment goes into this little piece of wood with some plumbing pipe in it, and it's got an old vacuum hose that's drilled through the back of my cabinet. It fits in behind the drawers. It comes out the other side of the chest and goes right to the dust collecting port on my belt sander. No hoses on the floor. It's really quite simple. It's just one run, but it's really doing the job for me. Thanks to Joan for buying me that vacuum cleaner. I've got a little clip under the bench to hold the main part of the hose, so I'm free to vacuum out these pots. Now the pots are clean, but the volume control is noisy. Listen to it. It hums right in the middle. Goes off, hums, and stops. I'm going to blast all these pots out with some cleaner. I've already removed the knobs. I'm going to drop the knobs to do this. I'm using a 1/2-inch socket on these hex nuts. That fits on a Gibson. While I'm at it, I'll remove the output jack too because it's loose. This little plastic plate is broken. I'll either fix it or replace it. This gives me a really good chance to clean all sides of the pots and get all the corrosion off too. And I can really get in there and flush these pots out the way I wanted to do earlier. Now I can fit the tube right inside the pot and give it a really good rinsing out, and any of the runoff or dirt that comes out will be caught by this plastic food wrap. Of course, the one I want to get most, that rhythm volume control, is the hardest to reach. Turn them back and forth. I clean them twice. I give each one a blast of air. I've seen some particles come flying out. Then a little bit more lube and I should be done. And it should work nice and smooth. We'll find out. I fished out this serrated washer that fell off in the hole there, and I'm going to pull it in place with this 1/4-inch plug that I took the cover off of, and I ground it down so I can slip it onto the jack, and I won't lose the washer that way. Guide it through the hole. I'm just going to put the jack in place temporarily right now to get it out of my way so I can get the control pots back in. Then later on I'm going to deal with this plastic jack plate. Either fix it or replace it. Problem solved. This stuff usually takes care of a scratchy pot. As for the jack plate, I'm not going to fix it. It's broken down here in a corner. I could super glue that, but it wouldn't do any good because it's too skinny. It's not a normal plastic thickness. I don't know what was going on this day back in 1973, but maybe Gibson just grabbed whatever they had. I'm going to use this replacement part, which is much thicker and stronger, and it fits right on. My little plug puller here does a good job of pulling the jack to me while I tighten home that hex nut. You know, I decided that's not a Gibson part. Somebody made that. It's bigger than the other one. They wouldn't make something so flimsy. I'm getting ready to work on the nut. I want to clean up the slots. They're kind of dirty and some of the strings are a little tall. Before I do that, I put a capo on at the first fret to eliminate the nut height as a factor in the action, and I set my bridge to that. I basically just lower the bridge till it buzzes, which it is, and then raise it till the buzz goes away. I'm setting the bridge height on both sides by eye. This is really low action, but you can get away with that on these really low frets. That's not buzzing now, so I'll take off the capo. I know that if it works with the capo on, that the bridge will work with the capo off. And I may lower the bridge more later. You sort of have to work the bridge and the nut height together. They're related to each other. I'm holding the guitar in the playing position and I'm strung to pitch. This is my homemade feeler gauge. It's the core of a wound string and it happens to measure 17 thousandths. And it's just dragging between the strings and the first fret. That's a good low action for the bass strings, but it's almost a little high for the treble. I think I'll lower them a little bit. In fact, all the strings are deeper in the nut slots than they need to be. I'll probably knock down some of the top of this nut. Since I know the bridge played well when I had a capo on, and I know that it plays well now open, I'm safe to lower the strings a little bit, and then I can readjust the bridge accordingly. All of these slots have some dirt in them. I'm going to make sure right now that it's not the dirt that's holding up the string. I can clean the dirt out with my saw.